Thank you all for joining me. I'm here today to talk about the art of teaching testing. My name is Jade Promhouse. I spoke with you guys, I think, last October, but a little bit about me, just to reintroduce myself. I am currently a test engineer at FAIR. I think last time I introduced myself, I was the only test engineer at FAIR. I am now one of three, which is very, very exciting. You can tell I've been like bragging about it to everybody I know. Aside from that, I am a graduate from the University of Waterloo with a Meetup degree that is the Bachelor of Mathematics. It's unique to a couple different universities. Basically means I spent my entire university career dealing with, probability and integrals and calculus and a bunch of stuff that I don't use on a day-to-day basis. But here we are. My hobbies are, refinishing furniture. I have a little side hustle with one of my best friends. I also sew, play video games at all times, and I love to read. The main reason that this slide is up here is just to give you an idea of why I should be here talking to you guys about teaching and testing. Like I said, I've worked at FAIR for almost 2 years now at this point. And because I was the only test engineer, I wasn't able to actually do a lot of the testing effort myself. It's not feasible, resourcing wouldn't allow for it, and the company didn't want me to do it anyway. So I had to figure out how to kind of up level the developers, the product managers, the designers, to be able to test themselves and to be able to test effectively. And I kind of pulled different experiences from the previous companies that I've worked at. All of their logos are on the screen. So that's a little bit about me. Before we actually get into the meat and bread, for lack of better phrasing, of the talk, I want to make sure that we're all on the same page first with regards to terms. It'll make everything a lot easier and set the stage, so to speak. So what do I say, or what do I mean rather, when I say the art of teaching testing, more specifically focusing on the word teaching? If you say teaching or teachers, I have a lot of friends who would say, oh, that's the university professor standing at the front of a lecture hall, lecturing content, blackboards taller than they are, scribbles everywhere, and students at their desks trying frantically to keep up. In this case, the teacher is that university professor, they'd say. So maybe that's what you guys think of. What else comes to mind? Maybe someone thinks instead of massive amounts of homework, all the late night assignments, the stuff you're staying up till 3 a.m. to do, the massive amount of textbook readings. In this case, you could say that the teaching is a result of the teacher who assigned all that homework, or teachers, or maybe alternatively, the homework itself is the teacher and the repetitive nature of the exercises. Practice makes perfect and all that. On a slightly happier note, maybe you think of beloved childhood figures instead, that kindergarten teacher that you had, Mr. Feeney from Boy Meets World with his patience and all of his stories, or, my personal favorite, Miss Frizzle from Magic School Bus. Fantastic teacher, a teacher who takes the odd way of explaining things and who turns education into an experience that the children can then interact with and learn actively. Regardless of what teaching means to you outside this talk, I want to center us on one specific definition for the purposes here. Let's focus more on Miss Frizzle, that side of things, and thinking of teaching as, the creation of opportunities or experiences for the students, handcrafted, unique experiences, if you will, for people to pick up or put down as they see fit, to learn from as they want. Your goal as a teacher here is not to assign curriculum content and enforce your students to absorb it. Instead, what you're doing is you're building a world of opportunities or possibilities for learning. And this is the important part, you're leaving it there for them to experience at their own pace. And we'll talk about that more later. And of course, if keeping Miss Frizzle in mind becomes a bit distracting for you because of her big smile and orange hair, you can instead think of this quote: the art of teaching is the art of assisting discovery. And remember that discovery is at the discretion of the student and not the teacher. So quick rundown of how the rest of this is going to go. We're going to spend some moments talking through the 5 W's of teaching testing. We'll start with the who, jump a little oddly to the why, as it'll help explain the goals of this entire talk. Then we'll follow it up with the what, and lastly, the where and when. After we finish with the appetizer, we'll move on to the meat and bones, which is the how. And I'll give you specific practices that I've used in the past and still do, and explain how they work and which roles they're best suited for. Following that, we'll talk about possible roadblocks that you might run up against and how you can fix them. What detours can you take to work around them to compensate? And after that, if everyone's game. I know we only have 4, so we'll make it work. But we'll do some little polls. We'll hear from you guys, your experiences, and we'll talk about how those data points relate to each other and what you can do to improve them. And lastly, there'll be room for Q&A at the end. And obviously, if it makes it easier for everyone, feel free to throw questions in the chat as we're going through. If it makes sense to address at the time, I'll just answer it right then and there. And if not, it can serve as a reminder for at the very end. Pardon me. So now, the first W, the who. In general, you should be teaching anyone who is open to learning, which basically means everybody is a possibility. You know, fellow test-focused individuals, whether it's new hires or people who've been there a while, any team members that you have outside of test-focused roles, developers, product managers themselves, like engineering managers, designers, any roles, even outside the ones that you normally deal with. So think beyond the testers and the developers to the product designers, products and designers that I've already talked about, and even further to customer support or experience, your marketing, your sales teams, anybody, basically. Because learning isn't specific to any one role. Anybody can learn, and everybody in one way or another does want to learn, and there's going to be content that is applicable to anybody at your company, regardless of what role they're in. It doesn't mean that they'll necessarily appreciate everything that you're trying to teach them or the time at which you're trying to teach them. It's unfortunately up to you to make your content engaging, to show the value of it, and to tailor your content appropriately to your audience, which we'll talk about more in a moment. But regardless, if it's there, people will appreciate and consume it at some point. The next W is the why, a little bit out of order. This one is quite honestly the easiest one to answer because there's so many different reasons that you would want to teach someone how you specifically test. First off, it helps up-level everybody involved. You know, not only do those consuming the content from you, your students, so to speak, they will obviously be learning from you, ideally, but also you're learning from them. You know, you're learning based off the questions they ask, what feedback they give, how they actually implement the lessons that you're teaching them, how they teach your lessons to other students. You'll learn all different ways that they have then consumed the content and pass it on forward. Another benefit that you and your teams can gain from teaching testing is that potentially you can actually start testing earlier in your development life cycle. So members, like if you're not in a meeting for whatever reason, say you're on vacation or you're sick, other members of your team can start bringing up concerns earlier in product handoffs, in demos, in syncs, all those types of meetings. Another way that we can do it is developers can actually start testing common cases as part of their coding phase, rather than waiting to the testing phase to find bugs that way. There's a bunch of different ways that you can bring that up earlier. Some other benefits that it can have, you know, having content ready-made will make it easier to onboard new hires. You can have like a set checklist of stuff that you want them to go through, documentation you want them to read, exercises that they can do. And as well, it also helps build consistency in testing processes across your various teams, across your entire company. This is especially helpful if you have a larger company. As well, if you have that content available and open to everybody for edits, this means that others can help build out that content even more and provide everyone else with the benefit of their experience, their expertise, their thought processes. And you're building what is essentially like a hive mind for testing, which is really great in a lot of ways. So why am I talking about building like a hive mind for testing? Like, why is that a good thing? The reason it's a good thing is that one of the best things that you can do for your team is enable them to work as if you were just not there. And like, this may sound a little bit counterintuitive, like it's basically, and something that a manager once told me once was, I want you to essentially work yourself out of a job, which sounds terrible, but it's not what you're doing in actuality. What you're actually doing is you're enabling your team to be more effective, and you're freeing up your own time and resources to do something that is different and actually better for the team as a whole. So for example, if you have scenarios that you're going to test with every ticket, like say you work on a web platform, browser support is generally a big thing that you're going to always care about. If you know what browsers that you need to support as a company, as a product, you can have developers check those while they're implementing, and you're saving yourself time because then you don't have to check them down the road. And you can take that time and focus on doing things like more creative test planning, running more intricate scenarios, putting in place more processes to help make the team as a whole more effective. your time is just better spent doing something else that's not repetitive. Number 3, the what. So what do you want to teach them? Obviously, you want to keep your audiences in mind when creating content for them, because not everybody is going to care about the same things. And to my point earlier, it's unfortunately a little bit up to you to build your content in such a way that it's either pre-tailored for them or that they can easily filter out the unrelatable portions themselves. So when you're doing that, the big question that you need to ask is what's most valuable to X, the person or role that you're thinking of. Product knowledge, for example, is something that almost all roles should be interested in, and common user test scenarios or issues to that effect are things that are great for roles involved in feature development to keep in mind. So your developers, your product managers, your designers, your testers. How-tos though, well, those are generally like more useful for new hires, less so for people who've been here a while, or for roles who don't necessarily delve into the nitty-gritty of how those actions happen on a day-to-day. So think of your sales, your marketing, your customer experience, say. It's something that's useful for them to know, especially if they're generating content for your customers. So think like walkthroughs, think marketing emails, things like that, rather than having them ping developers, your product, your design team, asking for screenshots or videos or things like that. If they know how to do the setup themselves, they can just go. They can actually have someone who has an idea of what needs to be said for the customers doing the content themselves, actually. And because it's not their primary focus, they shouldn't be expected to remember it like a snap. So having that documentation, those how-tos there for them is something that will just make their lives easier. And honestly, one of the best things that you can do to set yourself up for success in this case is to acknowledge that you don't necessarily need to know what each role needs to know. Don't assume that you know all that they want or need. Just ask, because asking takes almost no effort. And at the end of the day, you end up not only with better content, but better relationships with others as well. And they'll be grateful that you are A, including them, and B, tailoring the content to them specifically. As an example, I have a document at my current workplace that I wrote up and currently am responsible for maintaining. It goes through how to test things in our staging environment, covers a variety of topics, from how to create specific test users via the UI, via our internal tooling, how to configure test environments, how to turn features on and off. It's a wide variety of topics, but it's organized very specifically. Information that all roles would potentially care about is at the top, more easily accessible, more role-specific content, how to access API documentation for engineering, or how do we log bugs here for roles outside of EPD that don't necessarily do it all that often. That's further down the page and under subheadings. That way, whoever's going through it can really quickly, at a glance, figure out what's the spot that has the information that they care about, and they can ignore the rest of it. But if they want to, at some other point in time, it's there for them to read through as they see fit. And I base that organization off of conversations I've had with my coworkers, in all different roles in my company. And because it's also a living document, because the product is ever changing, I've also put in a little section of that document for folks to, suggest or request additional content. And there's also a disclaimer right at the top that says if people want to edit something or something's out of date or is missing information, that they should feel free to go and add it themselves so that they can further tailor it to their use cases. So our last two W's, the when and the where. When and where should we teach testing? Whenever and wherever possible is the short answer. Remember in the beginning when we talked about how teaching is building of opportunities, it's not formal, it's not regimented, and above all else, it's not required. You're not requiring your students to go through it. So obviously have documents available for reading, for consuming whenever needed, but also try to sneak in these lessons wherever you can into the day-to-day, into processes that you already do, conversations that you already have with people, meetings that you already host, take those and supplement them. For example, if you do regular handoffs or demos between development and testers, don't be afraid to take those as an opportunity to ask questions, or even better, ask the developer to show you how the product or change works in a specific scenario. After all, you're already talking, they're already showing you the feature. If there's a bug, God forbid, it'll save time if you go over it at their desk, so to speak, and you find it there where they already have the debug set up, they already have all the information that they need, rather than for you to, go away, go back to your desk, so to speak, do all your setup, do your test planning, set up all your test scenarios, and then run the test and find it there. It's much faster upfront, trust me. There's also similar logic for issues during handoff from your product team, as an example. If there's a logic flaw in what they're asking you to build, it's better to bring it up earlier rather than later. You have less rework at that point. They can account for edge cases better. It's much easier to do upfront. And if you're continuously bringing up the same things, odds are someone will notice and start bringing it up themselves. Especially helpful if you can't attend the meeting for whatever reason. Again, vacation, sick, move to another team. Another easy spot that you can kind of bring this teaching testing mindset in is within Jira tickets themselves or whatever you use to track your work items. If there are certain scenarios that you'd want tested, I'm going to pick on multiple browsers again because it's easy, and they're straightforward, which multiple browser testing generally is, add them to the ticket, put them as part of your acceptance criteria as requirements before handoff, whatever you want to call it, and ask the developers to test them themselves before handing it off to the test team. Make sure that you have that covered up front, make it as easy and unobtrusive as possible. And, ask them a quick question at the end when they do the handoff, did you test these things? No, okay, have a quick conversation at that point about why. Maybe you can test it together at that point. Random conversations are also a really good spot for bringing up concerns. Again, here, even more so than all the others, repetition and persistence is the key. You're going to have to bring up things again and again and again. You're going to sound like a broken record, and sometimes the goal of that is to get that broken record into their head without you having to say it. So that when they go to do something, they have that broken record being like, oh, Jade normally asks me to do this. I'll just go do that. I'll save myself time, as an example. Now the meat and potatoes of this talk, the how. When I was writing this talk initially, I had thoughts to organize it, and I think I sent James the outline based on certain types of learners, the visual, auditory, whatever you want to call those. I don't know about you all, but when I was in school, there was only 3 types. There was, the visual who learned through visual content, auditory learned through auditory content, kinesthetic learners learned through doing. And then at some point, I guess it got updated to 4, which is cool, not that big a deal, not that big a jump. Visuals just now split between visual versus reading and writing. Difference there being, visual learned through infographics, charts, pictures, and reading and writing is more the written word. And then auditory and kinesthetic stay the same. It's like, okay, that's not that bad. I can deal with that. And then I scrolled and I found this, guys. We're up to 9 now at this point. Didn't you know? My God. I thought I had to throw out my whole talk, but I didn't. Because regardless of what model you decide to use, you decide to prescribe to, what's important to actually take away here is you're not going to get every type of learner with one single type of content, or even a small handful of types of content. You'll need to diversify and figure out different ways to explain the same content in unique, fresh, different ways. And please don't panic. This doesn't mean that you need to come up with 9 different types of content. I promise you it's not that bad, because nobody's going to prescribe to just one type of learning. Everyone's going to be some combination hereof. And just because we're at 9 now doesn't mean we won't be at 20 down the road. So don't tie yourself to a specific model, figure out different ways, irrespective of the models. And if someone comes to you and is having trouble with all the content that you have, speak with them about how they learned best and try to come up with a new way at that point. For example, me, I'm probably, if I were to look at this, I'm probably a copy, teach, and kinesthetic learner. But everyone has a preference, right? And my preference is kinesthetic. So I'm going to learn best by doing. So content that is tailored to a copy learner, where I copy what someone else is doing, will work for me. Or I could just go and do the exercises that are laid out for me and do it myself. In the next section, I will go through some processes that have worked for me, still work for me, with kind of who they target best and why. But obviously, as with everything else in this talk, if you want to use them, and I do fully suggest that you do, they're great, make sure that you tailor them to your environment, because what I specifically do may not work in your workspace. There's probably some aspects of it that you can carry over that will apply, but direct copy may not always work. There is a subtle theme, though, running across all the processes that I'm going to talk about that I want to highlight before going into them, because I think it's really important. And that theme is that all of them involve the student in some way, shape, or form. How do you determine what type of learner you are? Actually, I will answer that now, because there's a bunch of different ways that you can do it. And one of them is actually the one that we'll talk about later, but I want to address this now. There are a bunch of quizzes that you can do. Actually, for the recording, in case I can't see. The question was, how did you determine what type of learner you are? How can others find out their learning styles? So there are quizzes that you can do online depending on which model you prescribe to. Honestly, one of the big things that you can do with doing this is give someone a list. Again, it can be the model, it can be a bunch of things that you already do. Just give them a list to start off of and ask them, if you were to learn X, if you were to learn how to create a user, what would you want to learn, or how would you want to learn it? And so they have that list of examples that they can work off of, and they can say, okay, well, I like this option. I like having, how to guided steps for this reason, and ask them why, like the why, the reason is important. And as they go through and explain the why to you, you can kind of go from that further and see, okay, well, what parts of it are important to you? Is it the fact that it's outlined very specifically and it's very structured? Is it more that you have something that you can copy? You can copy someone else's steps and work from that to how they like to learn. Did that make sense? Cool. So back to this quote for a minute. All the processes that I am talking about all involve the student in some way, shape, or form, regardless of what it actually is. And the big thing is that it makes the learning an active process. Regardless of how anybody chooses to learn or likes to learn, active learning is always going to be more effective than passive learning. This doesn't necessarily mean they all are kinesthetic learners, like they all learn by doing. That's not what I'm saying. And it doesn't necessarily need to be in their faces or at the forefront of their mind at all the time. It just means that it needs to be something they're actively participating in, whether it's a conversation that they're talking in, whether it's a document that they're going through and following as they go through. So like you can build in a quiz to be like, have you ever done those documents or online courses where they show you a bunch of videos and they have like a little quick quiz to make sure you've been paying attention? Something like that, where it's an active participation thing. You're actively making sure that they consume the content in that regard. It's going to be a lot more effective than then just listening to the videos and being like, okay, I learned, I'm done. You haven't actually confirmed that they've learned anything. So first process number one is set an example. Obviously, it's a really good way that you can teach good practices and good behavior just by setting a positive example in all manner of circumstances. But by doing this, you also have to make sure that you demonstrate the value of the lessons that you're teaching. So as an example, if you're trying to grow adoption of specific processes, perform them yourself first and bring it up in updates or other conversations that's what you're doing. Oh, I'm putting in the new test spec process and I'm doing that for this feature and this feature and this feature. And I really like it for these reasons. Be transparent about what you're doing and why, sneak in small explanations of the pros of what you're doing into conversations. Stand-ups are really great for that. If you're trying to grow product knowledge, as in, for example, across the company and are writing documentation to lay out how something works, encourage shared editing of these documents, ask people for review, promote others to write them as well. Set out guidelines for the behaviors that you want to promote, essentially. Do them yourself, involve others in it as a peer process of sorts. The peer process is going to depend on what it is, but figure out a way to get people involved and use that as a springboard into encouraging them to do it themselves after the fact on their own. This method is really good for teaching good behaviors or practices that you want others to follow, but can also be used to augment product knowledge teachings as well, and is generally good for all audiences, regardless of the role. I'm going to take a water break for a moment because I'm losing my voice. It's too dry here. I had rain in so many days. My poor garden. All right, next process is make demos or handoffs more involved. And it's something that I've already mentioned, so I won't go into too much detail, but I want to bring it up again because it's really easy, honestly, and it's extremely valuable as a teaching tool. I've worked at companies where both the handoff from product and design to engineering, as well as the developer to tester handoffs, they're more like watching a movie. It could also honestly be done without the other party involved. It's just sitting there and watching someone go through something, rather than a true back and forth interaction. And the whole point of these handoffs and things is that they should be back and forth. There should be some give and take. There should be some questions being asked, because otherwise, how can you make sure that everyone's on the same page? So, don't be afraid to make it a true back and forth interaction. Apologize for speaking up, but then speak up. Ask questions about how something does or is supposed to work. Don't focus, if it's a meeting full of people, don't focus on any specific individuals, but divide your attention so everyone feels like they're involved. Request demonstrations of something or clarifications on points that you're not necessarily sure about, or even if you are sure about them but don't think others are, request clarification at that point. Question and get thoughts circulating in their heads, because you're going to end up pointing out things that either people have misunderstood, or you're going to uncover misunderstandings, or you're going to uncover or point out big gaps in logic at some point, shape, or form, or even bugs. And I promise you, if you keep doing that, people will start to notice, and they'll start to go, oh, how is James, for example, how is James finding all those things? Like, why, what is he doing? What is he doing differently that I should be doing? If you keep doing it, they're going to eventually start doing the same thing, right? There are certain things in particular as well that you're bringing up more than once. I'm going to pick on browser testing again because it's easy. You keep bringing up, how does this look in Firefox? How does this look in Safari? How does this look in mobile web? Odds are, if you can't attend the meeting for whatever reason, or even if you are there and you give it a moment, somebody else will jump in and be like, oh, have we thought of mobile web testing? Or have we thought of how it looks in mobile web at all? So not only have you influenced their behavior, but you've also expanded their product and testing knowledge as well, which is really cool. And if you are the one on the demonstrating side of things in the meeting, prompt for questions. Don't be afraid to be like, does anyone have any thoughts? What are everyone's thinking in this specific scenario? Brock, what do you think of this specific requirement? Do you have any concerns? Gentle prompts. Sometimes people won't answer because they don't feel comfortable, but keep doing it, keep encouraging and, prompting others for questions, thoughts, their opinions. Make sure that everybody knows that, not only is that okay to do, but it's encouraged and actually preferred that people speak up. This method is really great for, all roles within EPD, especially with anything related to like hands-on testing, product knowledge, common test failures, any of that. But depending on the meeting can also be applied to other roles outside as well. For demos, is this targeted to product feature knowledge or more testing practice process focused? The ones that I have done tend to be both. It really depends on what the processes are in place at your company. I've definitely worked at companies where the product handoff, which like product handoff to engineering teams, which is a lot more of where the product feature knowledge comes into play, are very hands-on already. And so you're already having the process in place. There's already that product knowledge being shared. You don't have to worry about that. But this is going to sound really weird. I apologize. It really depends on the state of your product, the state of your company, the culture of your company, on which one is more focused on, because there may already be good standards in place for one or the other at your company already. In general, I do both, but that's because my company, again, has a very short limited supply of test engineers. Did that answer your question? Okay, cool. Next process or tool, for lack of a better word, is use templates. Use templates for test plans, session notes, debriefs. Use templates at the wazoo. One of the big things that it's really helpful for is giving newcomers a leg up, right? You're helping them set out guidelines for thought processes or areas that they're just less familiar with. So they have a starting place for their thinking. It provides a foundation for them to build off of. And, if you encourage them properly, it also will, in theory, give them the confidence and the bravery to expand off of it, knowing that at the end of the day, they're completing what's been asked of them, and anything they do is extra sugar on the cake. Obviously, what's on the screen are 2 screenshots of templates that I've used in the past. I still actually use the one on the right at my current company, and one of them is in Evernote, one of them is in Notion, but I've also had similar templates within Jira. Jira has great templating systems, and other software, like note-taking softwares that my companies have used, Google Docs, Google Sheets, etc. Templates are your best friends, honestly, and most note-taking software does provide that service in one way, shape, or form. But if it doesn't, for whatever reason, you can also just have a read-only doc, or even just a doc that says "do not edit" at the top. That is the template that other folks can then copy and paste into their own notes. As for what to put in these templates, think through your general processes. Think about what you do on a day-to-day basis, regardless of whether other people do it already or not, and pinpoint specific components of them that are useful for one reason or another, that are really good to have in almost all cases. For example, if at my one company, for the screenshot on the left, we had specific regression suites that we would run for tickets anytime that we had them. And sometimes you would run one of them, sometimes you would run all three of them, but regardless, you were always running at least one. And so when we were creating a template for it, added in a section for it to call out all the different ones that we had and prompt for which ones did you run, where are the links to the results, so that people knew that they could put in that information so that it was helpful for not only keeping track of their own testing themselves, helpful for the debriefs, which we would do at the end of testing. You have someone come over and check your testing, so to speak. It was there for the debriefs and also there for historical records. So if there was something that went wrong with the testing or we needed to go revisit it, we could actually just go and look at the regression suites the tester had run. And we had like handy retry buttons or re-click buttons. You just re-trigger the automation that they had run for their ticket. It was nice and easy that way. So to your own points, if like what you're doing, you're not sure what to put in it, start with a blank document and go through what you do, pick out your components and add a section in the template for that. It's a living document. It doesn't have to be one and done. So if you try it out a couple times and you find it doesn't work for you for whatever reason, or you want to augment it a little bit, go for it. It's your own document. Make it work for you. And the big things with this is that like it's serving as a prompt. It's not a requirement. And that's one thing with templates you have to be a little careful of, is making sure that people understand that this is not a hard requirement. Sometimes the things in templates are not going to work for all the tickets that you're doing. And so all it's there for is to serve as a reminder for you to be like, hey, do I need to consider this? No? Okay, then I can remove it. And if someone needs to come and do a review process and they notice you removed it, it's a really quick question to be like, why did you remove this? It's not applicable for these reasons. Okay, cool, that works, and move on. If something is more process related rather than specific information, so like as opposed to the automation frameworks that you ran, maybe it's something more around like when doing a debrief, we want to ask these types of questions or get this type of information. The template itself can also serve as a prompt for what information you want to dive into more. So you can include a section for it with either helper or subtext to serve as prompts for the processes, or just use the format of the template itself as a process. So at the company that I use the template on the left for, in our debrief section, I've removed it because it doesn't really make sense for this. But we had little questions such as like, what platforms did you run against? What was the change supposed to do? Who was a developer, so that we know back for reference, things like that. It helps the tester who's filling it out kind of prepare for those questions ahead of time, and also sets the reviewer up for success because they have a more comprehensive base to start their review off of. And if you're looking for examples to get you started because you're still not sure where to go, there's several versions that can be found online. And if you want either the ones that I've listed, or I have a couple others somewhere in my Google Sheets, my email I will share out at the very end. Feel free to shoot me a message and I can send you over the templates that I use. This method is really great for any roles because it can be applied to any type of document that you're doing on. These are all test specific, but you can also do things like emails or product requirements documents, things like that. It's a great way to teach, good processes, good planning, prompt for good practice, and highlight common scenarios that should be thought of anytime someone goes to write these documents. Next one, just a quick check in time. Okay, we're good. Next one is build out a process for reviewing test plans or charters. So I've mentioned debriefs a couple of times now, but if you don't currently have a similar process at your company, consider adding one. You can think of it as like a code review for your testing. It's a really great testing tool. It's essentially just when the tester has done their testing, you get another tester over, regardless of what team or role they're in, and they talk through what's been done, what the changes, and just suggest additional things or ask questions. You can also talk about, what automation's been written, how a feature is planned to be developed. If you're talking outside of testing debriefs, you can talk about debriefs for developers. Those are other good questions to have. All of these are opportunities for sharing learnings on all sides of the coin. Again, it's not just the person who's being reviewed that's learning, it's also the reviewer as well. Especially if you're doing things like peer reviews where you have a couple different reviewers. All of those reviewers are not only learning from the original author then at that point, but from each other. And so when they go to write their own document or do their own reviews separately, they'll remember what the other people brought up and bring that up at that point as well. Trying to remember. Yeah, so the big thing with that is like make it collaborative, make it an involved process. Again, to our point earlier about involving the students, you know, send, if you're all in one room together, talk about the processes out loud with each other. If you're on Slack, ping each other with like ideas, set up a group chat, you know, multi-person DM, whatever works, make it a collaborative space and have it be as encouraging as possible. You know, like there are no, I had to pause for a moment. There are no dumb ideas. There are no dumb questions. There are only questions that lead to others. And so make that kind of the space, the foundation that you're doing these peer reviews in. And again, next time they go to do one on their own or with other people, they'll bring that thought process, they'll bring that collaboration to that, and we'll just kind of expand outward, which is really great. Another big thing that you can do, and will have to if you are implementing these processes from the ground up, is to prompt for participation, especially to start. So as a specific example from my experiences at my current company, we have a process in place for writing out test plans for features. And a big part of that process is getting it reviewed, not only by me and by the other developers who are working on the feature with them, but by other members of the test team, other feature stakeholders, etc. And to start, it was literally just me reviewing, you know, and that is a problem for many reasons. But the big one is that it stagnates everybody's learning and also causes a big gap and like opens up the opportunity for stuff to miss, people to miss things because it's only them writing it and it's only me reading it. So in order to expand the scope of the reviews and bring in other expertises, I started tagging people, like really aggressively tagging people with specific questions. And the reason I did specific questions is because I wanted to start small. A lot of the time, these test plans are rather large, and someone opening up the document after being tagged is not necessarily going to want to read 3.5 pages of different scenarios. So starting small with specific questions such as, you know, Brock, what do you think of this scenario? Does this scenario kind of interact with any other features that you know of? Or, pardon me, James, do you know of any other edge cases around this area or this feature in particular? Things like that, like start small but open-ended so that they can take that and if they want to expand more, but it's also small enough that if they only want to do that small thing, they can, you know, starting small like that is that metaphor of like dropping small pebbles into a river or something like that. It barely makes a ripple and it's very low commitment and effort, but those little pebbles do add up. And if you keep tagging them on things and they keep getting the habit of answering, that's great, because then you can start asking them bigger questions, and you can start being like, can you read this section of the document and get back to me? One of the big things that I've said a couple times already, and you're probably going to be sick of me saying it by the end of it, is you have to be consistent with these things. You have to, you know, have patience, dig your heels in, accept that you're going to have to do it over and over and over, but it's going to pay off because once people get in the habit, there's nothing that you can really do to break that habit at that point. It's great. You have built a really good habit in somebody, and because it's going to keep showing value, they're going to keep doing it. This one's great for like testing or teaching product and testing knowledge and can apply to all roles in engineering, product and design, but also depending on the content, other roles outside it as well. Next one is Geo Presentations or Lunch and Learns. If your company does lunch and learns on a regular basis, that's fantastic. If you have meetups like this is another great avenue for that. But it's also really great for, you know, sharing ideas, wisdom, and other tidbits of knowledge. And if you can't do them live, you can also record them and share them out with your company after the fact. You know, whether you're using slides, demos, wild gestures, which I do a lot, make the best use of your time. And if you can have them live, try to make them engaging and interactive. If your company allows for it, which not all companies do, but if they do exercises within it, have polls, have like group sessions, do breakout rooms, whatever you can to keep people engaged and actually interacting. Or if it isn't live for whatever reason, it's recorded, have like a guided exercise up on the screen and say, pause here and take the next 5 minutes to go over this, and then we'll move on and go through it afterwards. And, you know, don't be the only one giving them, you know, encourage others to host their own if they start becoming knowledge experts in a specific area. Request topics be covered and ask for volunteers. Maybe set it up as a recurring meeting if you can, every month, every other 2 months, every 2 weeks. The content will kind of dictate which roles will find this most useful, but the beauty of this format is that with all of the Zoom capabilities that we have today, you can actually record them and save them for folks to watch at their own, I was about to say leisure, in their own off time, so that if they have questions, they can pause, they can go through it again at their own pace, and they can ping you later if they have questions at that point. And as with everything else here, if they don't find it interesting now, it doesn't mean they won't find it interesting down the road. So having it recorded gives them that historical ability to go back. One of the last ones is host onboarding sessions. So this is really big for new hires, obviously. I myself hold 2 onboarding sessions at my current company, and I've done ones at others. But this is a really good way to set off new hires on a good foot. So take anything that you know is really good to have knowledge or build knowledge of in their first couple of weeks. One of the things that I do is like how to test on staging. So similar to that document I mentioned earlier, I run a session about how to actually test on staging, where I talk about, here's how you create a test user, here's how you turn features on and off, here's where you find the information to do all of the different feature testing that you would need to do. Give them an arena where you can, let me rephrase, give yourself a platform, not give them an arena. Give yourself a platform where you can lay out the processes that you want them to take note of, that you want them to implement as they're starting, and give them the reasons behind it, so they know why they're about to do something. Again, it starts them off on the right foot, and also gives them an opportunity to have you be introduced to them as a friendly resource, as someone they can go to with questions, as someone they can go to for just general help. Like if they're struggling with something, serve yourself up as a mentor available for them, and you're going to have already that mentor teacher student, for lack of a better word, relationship built up from the get-go, which is going to be very useful for you as they get more familiar with the company. This is the last one. Build out a resource library of various types of different content. So take the results of all the things that you're doing from other processes, all the processes that I mentioned, all the ones that you do on your own, record the presentations you give, store the test notes that you write for features, the plans you put together, the templates you've built, all of that, store that in a library, supplement it with new documentation as well. So how-tos, feature breakdowns, list goes on and on and on and on. And make sure that the onus is not on your personal being to build and maintain this, because it's similar to all the other things. If it's just you teaching, you're going to burn yourself out. So use this as an opportunity to build a virtual teacher of sorts to help you out and encourage other ones to supplement, commit, help build this virtual teacher alongside with you. Prompt them for edits or additions to the library. Again, similar to the other ones, request content to be built and prompt for volunteers. If building this is something that can't really be done in your off time, see if you can get it as part of your work items and like log Jira tickets for it. For example, bring it into your sprints, assign story point values to it, make it part of the everyday so that it's just considered as part of the fabric that knits your company together. And obviously with this one, depending on the content, it can apply to any types of roles, any type of learners. It's really kind of a catch-all, honestly, for all the other stuff that you're doing. You can store whatever materials that you have from all those other processes in here and refer back to them. So potential roadblocks that you may come up against while you're doing this teaching of testing. First one is, you come across someone who has no desire to be taught. They can't be bothered to do new processes. They don't want to read any documentation you write. They're happy with how they are, what they do, and the status quo. They don't want to change. What do you do in this case? It's really hard. Honestly, the big thing is remembering back to what I said at the beginning, where teaching is not a formal process. This is much more about building opportunities for them to pick up as they want. If they don't want to learn through formal means, don't teach them. It's not worth or don't teach them through formal means, rather. It's not worth your time. It's not worth your effort. And at the end of the day, everyone's just going to end up annoyed and pissed off. So instead, as terrible as it sounds, be sneaky, be subtle, be that little ninja in the night. Make use of paired sessions. Use those demos, the demo process that I talked about. That's a big one for this. Make it seem like they are helping you. And really, they are helping you. They're helping everybody. But phrase it more as giving pardon me. They're doing something to help you in the short term, and ignore the fact or downplay it that they're actually helping themselves in the long term. to go back to that demo point for a second, sorry, my brain got caught there for a second. To go back to that demos, the involved demos, highlight the point that you're not asking them to do something, or you're not asking them to test something. You're not teaching them anything. You're asking them to help you out by showing you how to do something or how you would use the feature. Get them doing that kind of thing so they're more used to it. Another potential roadblock is lack of resourcing and time. So let's say you or your team just simply doesn't have the time to build up all the content that you want for this virtual library. It's going to take too much effort. Good documentation takes too long to write. Trust me, I know. In this case, the best thing that you can do is actually kind of twofold. So one, to our point earlier, use what you already do. If you're already writing test plans or test session notes, make that your documentation. If you're already giving demos, record those and use that. If you're already thinking of, your test plans and charters as this is how the feature is supposed to work, use that as your feature breakdowns. Even better, if you're about to test something and you're going to be doing a setup that's really common and something that everybody needs to know, record yourself doing it. Take the 2 seconds or 2 minutes that it's going to need to pull up recording software and just record yourself going through it, talk through the process as you're doing it. It doesn't need to be perfect. It really, really doesn't, I promise you. Just having that there is something that will be available for other folks to follow. And then if you have the time, you can go back and you can augment it. You can make it better at that point. The other part is that remembering that not all content needs to be consumable. To our point, remember, it doesn't need to be something that people consume. It can be part of the everyday. It can be part of the little meetings, the little conversations in the hallway. There's all kinds of different learnings that you can be, that you can make use of. So if you can't build out the library, there are other ways to teach. Next, lessons don't seem to be sticking. So you've tried again and again to get somebody to adopt a new process or pick up some piece of product knowledge, and for whatever reason, it's not working. They can't learn it. They're just struggling. You're struggling. Everyone's unhappy. In this situation, one of the first things that you can do is you can try to rephrase it. So to our point earlier about different types of learners, not everybody learns the same way. So if they're having trouble learning the way that you're teaching them, try a different method. Try rephrasing it. Talk to them about how they want to learn. Oh, my goodness, we're gonna have no time for polls. I apologize. Thank you for the prompt. Try to make it work for them. And if you're having a hard time actually figuring out a way to teach them, don't be afraid to bring somebody else in. Ask someone, hey, I'm having a hard time explaining this to this person. Can you give it a try and walk us both through it? And of course, be consistent. You're going to have to keep going at it. You're going to have to keep trying. It'll be worth it. Last one, pre-existing bad habits. Bad habits are really hard to break. Similar to how I said earlier, if you build a good habit, it's going to be really hard to get rid of. Same thing with bad habits. So unfortunately with this one, you're kind of stuck with doing things together. Make it not all about them doing something for you. Make it about you two doing things together to help everybody. Don't point out the failings, rather suggest additions that they can do. Don't point out the bad things, ask for good things. Make it as fun as you can, as engaging as you can. And again, be repetitive, do it together. Over time, it will end up eating away at their bad habits. But remember, you don't quit smoking in a day. It's going to take time. So I'm going to skip the polls then, but because we have 4 minutes left, does anyone have any questions aside from the ones that were in chat? Cool. All right, well, that will be it then, because the polls will take way more than 4 minutes. So